Spain's housing market has radically changed over the past 5 years.
The government...
You think it's worse?
Yeah, much worse. It's a supply problem. That is a red flag. That is a major red flag.
Where do you see prices heading?
I think property prices will...
The question is, should they be buying a property now or should they wait?
Yeah. It's an age-old question.
Is this a bubble or is this the beginning of a new era? Today, we're joined by expert property lawyer Raymond Larrain Nesbit to talk about exactly what's happening in the Spanish property market. Raymond, welcome back to the channel. It's good to have you here again. I've got a ton of questions. Everything that's got to do with Spanish housing, property market, what's going on. Before we get into the questions, Raymond, can you give the audience a bit of a background on who you are and your sort of experience?
So I'm a conveyance lawyer, so I'm the managing director of a Spanish law firm. We specialized in visas, property conveyance and taxation, and our client base are foreigners.
The big picture, where is Spain's housing market today? So if you had to explain the housing market as someone that's taken a break from Spain, hasn't been here for the last 5 years, gone to Australia and just come back to where we are today, how would you explain what's happened over the last 5 years?
Property prices have gone up sharply in a short space of time. So although it's not, as I say, it's not properly property bubble, the effects are exactly the same. So I think it would be more precise to call it the anti-bubble, as opposed to the 2008, whereas in 2008 we had a credit-fueled property bubble, which is driven by greed. So people bought properties to flip them and pass them on, and that drove prices going up all the time. This time it's different. This time it's a supply problem. There's a demand outstrips supply by a long shot, and this drives prices continuously upwards. So why do I call it an anti-bubble? Because it's like if we had gone from one extreme to the other, an extreme of building a lot of houses and suddenly demand dropping because of the 2008 crisis, and then property prices just crashed by 50% nationwide, as to now where we're almost building no houses whatsoever a year, but there's still a huge demand. So that's why I say it's gone from one extreme to the other, and this has fueled this surge in property prices nationwide.
So there is a clear gap between the amount of properties that the Spanish housing market needs and the amount of properties that Spain is building. Can we talk about the figures? Just throw some figures out there. Where are we today and where do we need to be?
Okay, so to contextualize this, we have to again look back at 2008. So back in 2008, Spain was building around 750,000 houses a year, which is crazy.
That's crazy.
Yes, it was the same amount combined as the UK, France, Italy, and Germany. It was yeah, crazy. So obviously that was a huge problem. So after the Spanish government learned from the fallout of the 2008 property crash, different administrations, I'm talking of every political sign, they decided to cut down on building homes. So this is why we need to contextualize to understand where we're at nowadays. So nowadays we're building under 90,000 homes a year, and we've run into a deficit of in or around 750,000 homes. But that figure, which is what most public institutions give you, such as the Bank of Spain, is not exactly correct, because the government...
You think it's worse?
Yeah, much worse. Yeah, exactly. Because the government approved last month a new migration rule, whereby they are nationalizing and regularizing migrants. Initially, it was forecasted at 450,000, then it went up to 650, and then to 900, and now the latest figure is 1.3 million within a short space of time of only 4 years. So that is going to have a huge impact on the housing market.
So let's just, look at the Spanish population, right, from where it was 10 years ago to where it is today, right? I mean, we're around 50 million people today, is that right? Just under 50 million people. We've grown by 3 million, is that right?
Yeah, almost 4 million. Back in 2016, 10 years ago, we were 46.4 million, and now we're almost 50 million.
That's in 2000?
This is 2026.
And when was it 46 million?
10 years ago.
10 years ago. Okay. So like even if like imagine from I don't know what the building amounts were from 2016 onwards, but like it's just the growth of 4 million people over 10 years means that we would need, millions of additional properties in certain areas, no? But there's something about Spain, and we talk about Spain on the channel a lot. And we talk about Spain as one, but Spain is quite diverse. It's not the same to talk about our coastline, Malaga, than it is to talk about, Madrid, Barcelona. How would you like, define the Spanish property market in its different facets or different areas?
It's complex, it's multi-layered, so there's not just one driving economy, there's different markets. So as you say, we have the large Spanish cities such as Malaga, Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia. It's hard, there are not many foreigners there. It's mostly Spanish-driven demand, natives.
Domestic.
Yeah, domestic, and well, obviously South American migrants as well. And prices there are, they've come up by 2 digits, an average of 13-14% in Madrid, for example, in Valencia and Barcelona. So it's a huge problem. But then you have the La España interior, the interior of Spain, which is depopulated. It's una España vaciada, where the young people from villages and small towns, they seek better job opportunities, higher wages, and so they migrate, they travel to large cities such as the ones we've already mentioned. And this drives prices of these properties down. So you have like a two-tier market, whereas in the España interior, property prices are steadily falling because, again, there's no demand, because the young people, there's a mass exodus to the large cities, to better job opportunities. And then on the large cities, Spanish cities, you have a huge price surge. And then you have all the coastal areas, which are dominated by a foreign demand, spearheaded mainly by British, Germans, and lately a surge of Dutch. And these property prices are also surging by 2 digits, 12, 13% per year. So obviously, from a foreign perspective, you really have to study well the market to know exactly where you're buying into, because there's still opportunities to be found, granted, but you have to know where to look for them. And there's also a change in the demand. Like when I started practicing law 24 years ago, people again concentrated in what you're saying, the coastal areas, the southern and the eastern coastal areas, Valencia, Almeria, the Cádiz, Malaga. Obviously the Canary Islands and Mallorca. But now, with the climate change, because there is a climate change, the temperatures are going up steadily, we see a lot of interest in the northern Spain. So there's a lot of client queries coming from Galicia, San Sebastián, País Vasco, because obviously, clients look at these prices and say, hang on, I can buy a very nice villa instead of paying, I don't know, 600,000 in southern Spain. I could just pay for 180K up north. And, the summers there are 1.5 months long, and the weather's mild. So there's a lot of interest now in the north of Spain as well. So that's kind of like changing.
So just on the pricing side of things, right? Like we've talked about this two-tiered Spain, which I completely agree. La España vaciada, the coastal Spain, the cities. It's really a tale of two Spains, right? We've seen, quite strong property price, increases over the past, few years, sustained, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see, that, this time next year, where do you see prices heading? Like as aggressive or growths which are as strong as recent years, or do you see this sort of stabilizing a bit? Where do you see prices going?
No, I think property prices will continue to go up steadily, but not as aggressively as we've seen over the last years, by 2 digits. Like, for example, resales last year nationwide, they increased by an average of 13.7, which I believe is just crazy.
So you'd say that we've reached sort of a sort of stabilization point compared to recent years.
I think the lack of supply in the property market is a hidden stabilizer, property stabilizer, regarding price-wise, because as the supply is in short demand, there's hardly any supply. That's what's going to keep prices steady. So if anybody's expecting, such as last time in 2008, property crash, property prices crashing by 40 or 50%, in my view, that is not going to happen. So it's true that we're not going to see dramatic property rise prices of 13 or 14% as of now, but I believe that prices are still going to go up by 5, 6, or 7% per year, definitely.
We were just talking about, the two-tiered Spain, right? And I've got an interesting fact here, right? Malaga average is around 4,500 euros per square meter, right? In markets like Marbella, it's more like 5,000 euros per square meter, right? And obviously, it's the lifestyle buyers that, that drive the price in these, strong markets. While in Ciudad Real, under 800 euro per square meter. Isn't that incredible? Same
It
country,
is.
just like two complete, 3.5 times less.
It is. I mean, I recently published an article in Idealista last month where I gave 5 examples of conveyances that we've been involved in, and also other colleagues of mine. And I gave the years in which the properties were bought and when they were sold, and there were some crazy cases. And this falls down to the government's misguided housing policy, which is driving prices continuously upwards, which is what I criticize in my articles. And I think personally that the market should cool off a bit, because it's not normal to property prices to go up so sharply.
So let's just 1 second talk about, other driving factors. So we talk about, population growth. We've talked about, housing deficit and how little we build in Spain. We've talked about the two-tiered Spain, which is also important. What role do you think inflation has in a market like the Spanish housing market?
Inflation would have an effect of cooling down the demand, because with rising inflation, obviously the central banks are forced to increase the interest rates, the price of money, which in turn impacts mortgage loans, which again appreciate, they become more expensive, which means in turn that lots of people cannot afford them any longer, which brings down demand. So higher inflation, as a matter of fact, has a positive effect in the way, by way of cooling down the market.
And do you think there is a difference in the impact? I mean, for example, if you look at markets like Costa del Sol, where most of our buyers are international, do you think inflation has the same impact in markets like these than other? What you're saying is more the domestic market. Am I right?
Yes, I mean it's for Spanish natives, the domestic demand, it's very difficult to buy a property now. For example, I was talking with a colleague yesterday where he knows 2 abogados del Estado, which are elite civil servants of the. So in Spain, we have like this bodies of elite civil servants, and abogados del Estado, or state lawyers. They are lawyers who specialize in defending the Spanish government, and they have high wages by report to Spanish wages. And we were talking that they cannot afford property in the most humble barrio of Marbella, in La Divina Pastora, which is the most humble
district or
district,
area.
exactly. Yeah. And it stuns me that these 2 civil servants who studied extremely hard to attain a position and who are making what I believe is good money, again, by report to Spanish standards, and this couple cannot afford a property in the most humble district in all of Marbella. It's truly stunning. So that shows that prices are getting way out of hand, as I point out in my articles, for the locals, for Spanish natives. So at the cuspid of the pyramid of Spanish, you would have these elite civil servants earning a lot of money. Obviously not the same level as bankers or whatever, but they cannot afford property now. And that is a red flag. That is a major red flag, in my opinion. And that should be addressed at a government level.
Do you think the government's doing enough?
No.
What should the government be doing?
I mean...
oh, and the question, do they want to fix it?
I think the government is happy with high prices, despite what they claim publicly to the contrary. I think the government has a vested interest in property prices being high, but again, there's a mismatch between the interests of the government and the interests of the people. And when this happens and there's a disjunction, then we have an issue. We have a major issue. And I believe the government could do many, many things, as I pointed out in the article you saw last year in Idealista, by way of addressing the situation. Some measures that could be done short-term, others mid-term, and others long-term. Some require bipartisan consensus, from both political parties. But definitely the government could do much more to reconduct the situation.
So let's talk about, short-term, mid-term, and long-term solutions. What would you do, in the short term? So, we all vote for Raymond Larrain Nesbit.
So
What do you think are the technical, technical short-term legislation or things that the government has to put in place in order to start fixing, helping sustain the housing market?
okay, so first of all, like around 33-35% of property prices are all taxes at a national, regional, and local level, which is bonkers. Okay, I believe this doesn't happen in other countries. So like,
So for the audience watching this right now, if you're buying a property, it's a new construction property at like 6,000 euros per square meter, for example, it's a
yeah,
brand new property, 5,000, which is quite normal in this market. You're looking at 1,800 euros of that money just in taxation.
over 2,000 euros
Over
just in
2,000
taxation.
euros.
Yeah, yeah. But then again,
Over 2,000, yeah.
but
Sorry, I
then
stand
this
correct.
is why I say there's a mismatch between what benefits the government and what benefits us, the people, and this is creating issues. Like if I'm the government, I'm happy with high prices, property prices, because I levy all these taxes, and obviously, if a property is worth 1 million, I'm going to earn a lot more money than if the property is worth 300,000. So as a government, I'm extremely happy with these high property prices because I get much more money. As a matter of fact, we're seeing that the tax office, year on year, reaches new record levels of higher taxation levels, and I think they've earned like over 327 billion
It's
euros.
50% more, right? 50% more than in previous years. It was a
Yeah,
ridiculous figure
it's
like
just
that.
ridiculous. So the Spanish government is raking in these huge amounts of money, which God knows what it's doing with it. But as a government, if I'm in the shoes of the government, I'm happy with high prices because I'm making a lot of money.
So back to the short-term solution. We were talking about taxes and I interrupted you. So what would you do?
First of all, I think local administrations are highly dependent on these taxes they raise from property. They hold a lot of land. Los ayuntamientos, the local town halls, they should free this land and make land more readily available for developers to do their job. Because in truth, what's holding back the supply chain are the developers. They are shackled with chains by administrations with a lot of red tape. So if I'm a developer, I don't have the necessary freedom from an administrative point of view, let alone the taxation point of view, to build homes. I can't do my job because the government is not letting me do my job, and therefore I do not build homes, or I build them at a very limited amount.
This is very interesting because, like, if you look at a ticket price of any new construction somewhere on the Costa del Sol, new construction prices really depend on where you are in Spain, right? Because of the land price and so on and so on. But if you look at 6,000 euros per square meter, right, that people are paying, on average somewhere here on this coastline, we've said, over 2,000 euros of that is just taxation, right? There's so many other costs to the developer: acquisition of the land, all the cost of purchase, all the cost of architects, financing, and da 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 da. What they actually end up taking home is around only 15 to 20% in some cases, right? So
Yeah.
they risk a lot. They take big swings, right? And there's not that much built into, people look at developers like the greedy developer. And of course, there are, a lot of greedy developers. But at the end of the day, like what you're saying is you need to help these guys enter market, liberate land, make it easy for them, lower taxes, and get them to supply product. That's what you're saying.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. This is what I'm saying. There's an ongoing narrative that is being fed by the government and other political parties, blaming entrepreneurs, business owners, and obviously developers, that they are making a killing. They're making huge amounts of money. When the truth is that the net profit margin is under 10%, okay, and it used to be higher, but it comes a point to the developer. At the end of the day, it's all about maths and profit. And if the numbers don't stack up, well, we don't build because we're not going to make enough money. And that's what's happening right now. So they're building lots of niche and boutique developments aimed at a higher segment, higher target audience, very affluent. But the common man, there's not enough properties going around for people. So this is, again, demand is outstripping supply, and all this can be traced back to the government's misguided housing policies. I mean, I don't want to get political, but the government wields all the power to change this. It could change it overnight if it wanted to.
Okay, so we've talked about short-term taxation would be one way to help the Spanish housing market,
freeing
right?
the land as well.
Freeing land, right? what would be your midterm solutions?
I would reduce massively all the red tape. Like, for example, here in the region of Andalusia, with new laws that the new administration put into place as from 2019, they started building in these rural areas. Obviously, they protect what's the greenbelt lands and the natural parks, but it's crazy how in other countries you buy a plot of land and you can build, whereas in Spain it's, oh no, 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 no. There's a lot of planning regulations going on, and that's just bonkers because that just drives prices upwards. So if we could just be a bit more simpatico with rural land and more flexible and build more in rural land. I'm not saying that if you buy a 500-meter plot of land, you build a house of 300. But if you have a 10,000, 15,000 plot, which is sensible in my opinion, then you can build yourself a 200 or 300-meter house. I think that's very logical, and that is something that replicating the model of Andalusia, which has been incidentally fairly successful, it should be extrapolated to the rest of Spain, and that would surely bring down house prices. Yes.
Okay, so there's a known businessman in Spain called Jose Elias. Jose Elias, I'm not sure if you know who he is.
No.
He's the owner of Audax, and he recently on social media um, said the following. No, he said, "I can fix the Spanish. I can increase supply by doing the following: take areas which are suburban to big cities, places which are higher density build, not really outskirts, but suburban areas where you have multi-story buildings, and just as easily as rezoning areas to add 2 or 3 heights additionally to these locations. So instead of building a 6-story building, you can build a 10-story building. Add let's say density of build to these suburban locations and help this way as well. So one of those midterm solutions is, again, it all goes to increase supply. It all goes back to the same thing.
I disagree. I think it's horrible to see these high density buildings, and I mean, perhaps I'm more conservative, and I like seeing the 2-story buildings max, maybe 3, but
I think
not
he's talking Madrid, big
well,
cities, no?
if it's a major city central, obviously that's fine, but not in other places, because then we
No,
would
no, I
end
mean
up
it would destroy the character. No, no, I agree with you. No, no,
totally would destroy the
I'm talking
character.
like for those for the Spanish cities, Madrid,
Major,
Barcelona,
large
major.
nuclear.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
luckily, I have to say that if you look at Costa del Sol, I think we're very, very lucky with our urbanistic sort of parameters, and they don't allow a Benidorm. You know what I mean? Hey, hey, by the way, I like Benidorm. It's lovely, but this is not the character of this place.
Yeah.
For example.
This is all the other measures could be tax-wise. Like, for example, it could be tax incentives, long-term tax incentives, because nobody plans for the short term of 2 or 3 years, which is useless from a taxation point of view. But the government, for example, should incentivize people in over a 20, 30-year span, saying, well, if you're going to buy a house, we're going to deduct a percentage of your IRPF, we're going to facilitate loans, and that would encourage people to get into the property ladder, and that would help out, because again, Spain has I'm talking of the native population, has a huge problem, which I think we've now normalized the situation, but it is not normal at all seeing 35 or 40-year-olds living with their parents. That's, again, it's just crazy. All these people, age 30, 40, they should all have their own children. They should all have own their own homes. And they just can't on their precarious wages because, again, prices are so high. And again, this is something that the government should address.
There's this narrative that sometimes I guess that would make some sense, that the foreign buyers are taken home from Spaniards, and I think that in some cases we can see that happening. What's your thoughts on this narrative?
It is true to a minor extent, okay? I mean, I criticize this optics heavily in my Idealista articles. This is a narrative that is being pushed by the government and all its satellites, laying the blame neatly on foreigners. It's all these affluent foreigners are driving prices up, and they are pricing natives out of the market. It's true to a minor extent. And where is that extent? The coasts. In truth, the foreigners are not the ones pushing up the property prices in Spain. The real issue is the lack of supply. That is the main number one factor. And that again can be traced back to the government's misguided housing policies, which are driving properties sharply upwards.
Do you see the Spanish housing supply being addressed and fixed in the short term?
No, this is what I say in my article's conclusion normally, that it cannot be fixed the short term. Even if the government, even if there was a new government or this government really had the willpower to change things and said, okay, well we're actually going to change this, and it had to be partisan approval and such, it wouldn't be achievable, at least in the midterm. And by midterm, I mean the next 3 or 4 years. So I believe property prices are going to go up still over the next 5 or 6 years. Granted, not at 13 or 14 or 15% per annum, which is again crazy, but perhaps at a more reasonable 5-6%.
Yeah,
Three would be ideal, in my opinion. 2-3% would be ideal.
So the question is, for someone that's watching this right now and they're on the fence, they want to buy a property, they don't know exactly, they're studying the market, they're observing, they're listening to content just like this to inform themselves, right? The question is, should they be buying a property now or should they wait?
Yeah, it's an age-old question. I've got clients who've been waiting since 2017 telling me, property prices have increased massively by 25%. I'm going to wait for a property crash. Well, here we are 10 years later, 9 years later in 2026, and property prices have gone up by 140%. So to reiterate, I don't see a property crash coming. I don't believe property prices are going to drop by 40-50% as it happened last time in 2008. And I did say back then that property prices were going to crash by that much. I believe that property prices will stabilize. Again, the lack of supply is a hidden stabilizer of the property prices, because they cannot go down, because the demand remains steady. Or now with the new migrant regularization procedure of the government, which is going to bring 1.3 million, or the extended 5 to 6 million family members, new people into Spain, property prices are going to continue all the same or even higher. So property prices just cannot drop, because it's just economics. Okay, so it's an issue. And the only way around it is the government must facilitate the way for developers to do their job and build more houses.
Which is not going to happen in the short, midterm, and we'll be back here next year talking about exactly the same thing.
I am fairly sure we will.
Raymond, that's a perfect wrap to this video. Thank you for joining us again, and we look forward to our next catch-up again next year.
Thank you for having me.
And a message for you guys watching this video. I hope you enjoyed this discussion, this interview, and the topics we talked about. I would love to hear what you have to say about this, what Raymond's talked about, what we've discussed. Have you got any questions for us? Drop them below in the comment section. If you agree, disagree, comment that as well. And if you did like this piece of content, press that like button so we know that the right content is coming your way. And like always, if you want to stay posted with videos just like these, lifestyle videos, property, real estate information on Spain and specifically Costa del Sol, press that subscribe button. And if you want to be notified every time a video comes out, press that bell button. Until next time, guys, let's say bye to them, Raymond. Hasta luego.